Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another reading. Today's being Scum Villain Self-Saving System, which we haven't read in a little while. Good morning, Daniel, Jeff, Lopsel, Adrian, Nafi, Silver. Hope I've said all your names correctly. Feel free to correct me if I haven't. We're getting back to Scum Villain today, chapter 41 and 42. Before we start, I have a few things that arrived in the mail the other day that I thought I'd show y'all. A little chance to show off my collection here. Hello, Chris Amity. I'm sorry you're having a bad day. Hopefully it gets better soon. And I'm sorry you're not feeling well, Jeff. Hopefully that also passes. I know that's been rough lately. So I ordered some things from a website called Taobao. Maybe it's Tobo? I gotta check how you say that word. But it's a Chinese website that sells a bunch of stuff related to all kinds of things, but there's a couple different stores that have things related to novels like these, Danmei. And I ordered a few things for Heaven Official's Blessing that arrived yesterday. They're very cute. And also, this is my general collection anyway. We're gonna use the cat cam, see if we can see very well. It's kind of dark over here. Is that gonna help? There we go. That's better. So that's actually Scum Villain. That's just the box it came in. This is one of my new things. Look at it! Okay, let me set the camera down. It rocks! It's a cutie! Look at it rock! I'm ADD as hell, so, like, it's very troublesome for me that I have this, like, moving toy now. It's super adorable. Got some buttons. That's Shen Ching Cho. And some keychains. These are, like, little lanterns. They're adorable. Poor Shilian is actually upside down, poor fellow. And then these are more Scum Villain things. I have a problem. I do, I know. Alright, let's flip that back around. I actually have some doubles that I'm thinking of doing some kind of giveaway with, but I think that's probably going to be on Twitter or something. Whenever I decide to do that, I'll link y'all. Make sure y'all don't lose your chance to get something. Alright, so today, let's see. We stopped last time with, Shen Qingqiu had been basically framed for these bad events that happened recently, the killings and the demons and all that. And Luo Benghe is back. Luo Benghe is back. And Shen Qingqiu is obviously like, oh, he's gonna get me, he's gonna kill me, because obviously he's gotta be angry at me for betraying him. Doesn't seem quite that way to us, huh? And so Shen Qingqiu took the chance to try and run away, because the body that he needs, or the spell that he cast as backup, I don't think it's quite clarified yet what it is, I kind of slipped, is in trouble. He's trying to get away so that he can activate his backup plan and hide from Luo Benghe, because he thinks if he sticks around, he's just going to end up dead. But Luo Benghe is following him. Last time, he ended up trapped in a dream, I believe. He realized he's trapped in a dream, and Luo Benghe is hunting him down through it. So we, at the very end of last chapter, he entered a room and found his good friend Luo Chengge stabbing himself. So obviously he's like, okay, this is a really weird dream. My friend is stabbing himself. I'm being chased by my angry student. This sucks. So that's where we are. Chapter 41. Fleeing Death and Hua Yue 2. His body was stained with blood, large swaths covered with a ghastly deep red. The wounds weren't only in one place, and there was a stream of blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. It looked like he'd already stabbed himself with the sword who knows how many times, yet his expression looked both furious and crazed. It was obvious he was delirious, qi deviating. Beneath the rays of dim yellow light, the picture was extremely horrifying. Shen Qingqiu actually momentarily forgot this was still inside the dream realm, and threw himself over, wrenching the sword away. The sword was already staked in the center of Liu Qingge's heart. With only a light touch from Shen Qingqiu, fresh blood violently spurted on the spot, filling his vision with red. Shen Qingqiu's mind cleared a little, and he backed up 2 steps, but bumped into another person. He jerked his head around. Yue Qingyuan's head was lowered, gaze meeting his. Though their gazes met, these 2 eyes were empty and devoid of light. From his throat to his chest, forelimbs, and abdomen were all densely pierced with pitch-black arrows. Pierced with 10,000 arrows. Shen Qingqiu finally understood what these were. They were their original deaths, the deaths that he should have originally personally caused. Shen Qingqiu couldn't stand it anymore. He'd rather be outside, surrounded by stares from groups of faceless people, than see this sort of thing. He backed up in the direction he'd entered, actually managing to brush the wooden doors. As if he'd been granted amnesty, Shen Qingqiu kicked the doors open and rushed outside. This time, his mind was a mess. His footsteps confused as he tripped and staggered along, cutting a rather sorry figure. Everyone was on the street watching him in a deathly silence, and while he was disoriented, he crashed headlong into someone's chest. The person's hands immediately came over his back, gathering him into their arms. The other party was a little taller than him, slender and willowy, in black clothes like ink, exposing only a fair neck. Above that was a sinister mask covering their face. Shen Qingqiu hadn't spoken yet, when a smiling voice came from above. "Shizun, be careful." Even without lifting the mask, he knew whose face was underneath. Shen Qingqiu immediately began to struggle. The other party didn't forcibly hold him down, so struggling free wasn't difficult. Only after retreating several steps and maintaining a safe distance did he right himself. Shen Qingqiu said, "The city was created by you?" Luo Binghe slowly removed his mask. His expression looked like he was sorry they couldn't keep playing hide and seek. He said, "Correct. What does Shizun think?" Shen Qingqiu slowly nodded his head. "You truly deserve to be called Meng Mo's succeeding disciple." To be able to create an illusion this detailed, he feared it was nearly as good as the city Meng Mo had created to trap them back then. Furthermore, it had very accurately grasped his great fear. Originally, Luo Binghe's mood had seemed quite good, but on hearing those words, the smile on his lips faded. "I'm not Meng Mo's disciple." Shen Qingqiu was slightly curious. "Didn't you accept him as your master?" After holding it in for a while, Luo Binghe answered in a peeved tone, "I didn't!" "All right then, if he didn't, he didn't." Shen Qingqiu didn't think there was any point wasting time on this. Luo Binghe said, "Shizun, if you're willing to return by yourself, you can ask for anything." Shen Qingqiu said, "Are you offering a plea bargain?" Luo Binghe said, "As long as I don't dissolve the blood within your body, fleeing anywhere is futile." Shen Qingqiu said, "Oh, is that so?" He smiled. "Then right now, why haven't you personally come to catch me?" Luo Binghe stiffened, sparks flashing by in his eyes. Seeing this reaction of his, Shen Qingqiu was even more sure. He leisurely said, "Something's gone wrong with that sword of yours, right?" The heavens smiled down on me. After falling into the endless abyss within the stomach of a huge, ancient beast, Luo Binghe had found a mythical sword, forged through a master demon's blacksmith's entire life's worth of painstaking labor. The sword was called Shin Mo. Just by hearing this name, you'd know it was something very dangerous, right? That was a must. The stronger the spiritual artifact, the harder it'd be to control. From ancient times to now, Shin Mo had passed through the hands of more than 100 masters, and all had been heavenly geniuses from various races. Yet despite this, none of them had been able to escape the fate of dying to their own sword. Shin Mo would lash back against its wielder. If you could make it submit, it would be a formidable weapon in your hand. If one day you were unable to control its evil tendencies, you'd be no more than a blood sacrifice to the sword. Only after starting the Demon Realm plot had the original Luo Binghe gone through his first bout of mental unease and narrowly escaped Shin Mo's backlash. Afterward, for the sake of solving the problem, he'd started a 500-chapter-long side plot and collected 8 to 9 girls. But right now, with that plot in disorder, the backlash event had also moved earlier. Shin Mo's backlash was no joke. No wonder he hadn't given chase. He was busy secluding himself for recovery, so he was unable to come capture him. Suddenly, Luo Binghe grabbed his shoulder and forcibly yanked. "Rip!" "Why again?" Luo Binghe's face was almost as dark as a pot's bottom. Each word he spat out sounded like he'd first ground it between his teeth. even if I can't come in person for now. Shizun shouldn't be too happy. That doesn't mean you should tear my clothes! Shen Qingchu clutched the remaining fabric tightly and indignantly said, What are you doing? Is this your only method of humiliating others? Luo Binghe said, It was clearly Shizun who humiliated me first. System, satisfaction points, plus 50. You can add points for this too? Sick. Why does this feel so sick? When Luo Binghe's hand exerted force, the white clothing's fabric disintegrated into pieces, drifting away on the wind. His anger still unappeased, he pressed towards Shen Qingqiu. Seeing his expression, Shen Qingqiu feared there be no end to this. He'd never known that Luo Binghe's crazy clothes-ripping tendencies, but of course he couldn't just sit here and resign himself to it, and sent 10 or so blows at him, quick and nimble. Luo Binghe could clearly easily occupy the upper hand, but like a cat playing with a mouse, patiently engaged him in close combat instead. Shen Qingqiu's movements were quick, but in Luo Binghe's eyes, he was always one step behind. When he aimed a palm strike, Luo Binghe would always evade with a hair's width, calm and unhurried, then as if reciprocating politeness, return it. On top of that, the system was being extremely annoying. The satisfaction point notifications ringing without end, 20, 30, 50, etc. The demonic sounds flooded his brain. After several back and forths, it was Shen Qingqiu's face turned to darken. So he's trying to fight the protagonist and losing pretty badly, and the system keeps telling him, the protagonist is extremely pleased by how much you suck right now. Just ding, ding, ding. That's such a funny mental image. I can't wait to see that animated in a show. That would be so funny. I really hope they do get to make more of this show. Where are you aiming? Are you messing with me? Shouldn't the goal of a fight to be defeating the other party? This wasn't a fight. It couldn't even be considered sparring. It was basically harassment. While thinking this, Shen Qingqiu's concentration slipped, and he used too much force, falling into Luo Binghe. Luo Binghe actually didn't evade at all, and let Shen Qingqiu crash into his arms with a thud. His voice carried laughter, like his mood had risen once more. Shizun taught me this maneuver. When it comes to force, there's a time for restraint and a time for release, to avoid losing your balance. How could you forget it yourself? At this moment, Shen Qingqiu's mind was bombarded with a colorful explosion of, little beast. Fuck! This maneuver really was something he'd taught Luo Binghe. He still remembered that time, not long after Luo Binghe had moved out of the woodshed. Though he was blessed with heaven-surpassing talent and had come up with a way of fighting through his continued reckless struggling, other than a couple of cutting and stabbing moves every new disciple knew, he knew absolutely horse shit about any higher-level moves. After watching him practice a series of sword work, palm work, and footwork techniques, Shen Qingqiu held his forehead for a long time. Luo Binghe awaited his evaluation beside him, anxious and nervous. Shen Qingqiu couldn't bear to hurt him, and finally squeezed out a line after a long while. Quite pragmatic and flexible. For the sake of correcting Luo Binghe's tragic habits, Shen Qingqiu had put in a lot of painstaking effort, giving him private guidance daily. He didn't understand why. With Luo Binghe's intelligence and comprehension, a nudge should have been enough, without needing him to speak twice. But in reality, Luo Binghe was incredibly stubborn. He'd forget immediately despite tireless instruction and would always use too much force, slamming into Shen Qingqiu's arms who knows how many times until Shen Qingqiu finally became angry. Are you doing this on purpose? I think they just said that he would purposefully throw himself at his teacher just to, hug him. Oh my god. Unable to help himself, he slapped the back of Luo Binghe's head, neither light nor heavy, and shouted, "Is this anticipating and defending against the enemy? You're basically throwing yourself into their arms!" Only with this did Luo Binghe, face completely flushed, finally start practicing earnestly. He no longer dared make mistakes so easily. But today, Luo Binghe was instead lecturing him on his incorrect stance. What nonsense is this? Shen Qingqiu felt like his dignity as a master had been challenged. He'd yet to attack when Luo Binghe's hands trailed downward, following the line of his back, causing goosebumps to explode over his back in its wake. Shen Qingqiu spoke through clenched teeth. "Luo Binghe!" The system. Satisfaction points, plus 100. Congratulations! Congratulations, my ass! Luo Binghe again plucked off a length of shredded cloth and said, Seeing Shizun in this robe makes me very unhappy. It's better to rip it all off. Doesn't this mean he won't stop until he's completely naked? Huh? Shen Qingqiu said, Even if you hate me, there's no need to take it out on this robe. Moreover, this is Gong Yizhao's robe. Luo's Binghe's face fell. Shizun's the one who truly hates me, unwilling to associate with even a piece of my clothing. Why? Why are two big, strong men agitatingly discussing a piece of clothing while surrounded by stairs? Luo Binghe, are you actually the sensitive type? I even patted it clean and folded it for you. What more do you want? It can't be that you wanted me to hand wash and personally return it to you. If you don't remember, last time, Shizun's clothes got destroyed in the whipping, and so Luo Binghe left his jacket for him. But when Shizun went to leave, he folded up the jacket and left it, and Gong Yizhao, the other guy, gave him a jacket instead. Luo Binghe is destroying his clothes because he's angry that Shizun turned down his jacket for the other guy's jacket. That's what this is. How do you not see this man is head over? Anyway. Shen Qingqiu's expressions shifted erratically. Luo Binghe saw this and said, What is Shizun thinking? He coolly said, If it's about Gong Yizhao, let me advise Shizun, you needn't think about him anymore. Hearing this, an ominous feeling rose in Shen Qingqiu's heart, and he said in a forceful voice, What happened to Gong Yizhao? Logically speaking, Gong Yizhao's banishment to defending a border in a desolate region without any future prospects should have happened after Luo Binghe and the little palace mistress slept together. But now the plot was already jumbled to the point where even airplanes shooting towards the sky, the father himself, would no longer recognize it, so naturally anything could have moved earlier. But he'd yet to hear Luo Binghe's answer when the faceless people near Shen Qingqiu suddenly stirred. Originally, they'd only been vacantly standing there, watching blankly as if they were disabled or doing their own thing. Now they were starting to slowly gather around him. Shen Qingqiu was being squeezed in the center, but couldn't directly blast them off. He looked again at Luo Binghe. His brows were tightly furrowed, a hand pressed to his temple, too occupied to notice anything else, as if he were enduring an onslaught on his mind. Shen Qingqiu immediately had a realization. It was likely Shin Mo taking the chance to lash back, trying to disturb Luo Binghe's mind. He couldn't spare more energy to maintain the barrier, so the dream realm was beginning to run amok. If he didn't leave now, then when? Currently, Luo Binghe couldn't spare any attention for hindering him, so as long as he experienced one more illusion and overcame the concealed fears within his heart, he could destroy this failing barrier. Shen Qingqiu left just like that. Luo Binghe's head hurt like it was splitting open, but he was unable to move. He yelled, I dare you to take another step! Shen Qingqiu took 10 steps. Afterward, he turned his head. How's this? Luo Binghe was about to cough up blood at the sight. He ground out each word, one by one. You just wait and see. Shen Qingqiu's gaze didn't waver. He coldly and loftily said, Goodbye. You think I'll just wait here because you told me to? I'm not an idiot! Shen Qingqiu glimpsed another shop to the side. He kicked open the doors, leaping inside. No matter what appeared this time, Shen Qingqiu was absolutely certain he could calmly face it. At the very least, more certain than when facing Luo Binghe. The doors behind him closed, and it was like the noisy clamor from outside had been severed by a sharp knife, transforming into a deathly silence within a split second. Shen Qingqiu held his breath and silently waited. After a long while, it was as if someone had lit a candle, and his surroundings slowly and waveringly grew light. Shen Qingqiu looked down, coming face to face with a countenance that was both foreign and familiar. Before him kneeled a frail-looking youth. He wore coarse clothes and was bent over, kneeling on the ground. It was a crestfallen pose, and his hands were tightly tied with a thick, rough rope. Though his face was deathly pale, his eyes were full of life. Shen Qingqiu met gazes with him unwaveringly. This definitely wasn't his memory, but this face was indeed exactly like his. The only thing was missing the polish of time and cultivation, while a youth's inexperience had been added. This was Shen Qingqiu, yet it wasn't Shen Qingqiu. If it must be clearly said, this was Shen Jiu. Shen Jiu is the... Okay, so let me explain this in case you're lost. In ancient China, in the past, in various eras of Chinese history, people had two names. They had like a courtesy name and like a personal name. And so in this story, his full name, Shen Qingqiu, is the public name. Shen Jiu is the private name. But the book uses it to refer to the original soul that originally was in this body. So the bad guy from the book originally is Shen Jiu. So he's saying this memory is from the guy who used to live in this body. But of course he doesn't get to see more of the memory because he wakes up. Shen Qingqiu abruptly sat up on a wooden slab. After being startled awake, he looked around at his surroundings. Only then did he realize he was lying within an abandoned residence. The sky was already bright, white light streaming through the worn-out window and cracks in the rice paper. He remembered. Last night he'd wandered randomly through the festival and not long after found an old, uninhabited house. He'd originally only intended to rest a little, but unexpectedly he'd carelessly fallen asleep, letting Luo Binghe catch him within the dream realm. Remembering the illusion from before the dream realm collapsed, Shen Qingqiu couldn't help but sink into thought. Though his and the original Good's souls counted as two different people, in the end, he was using someone else's body, so there would at least be some influence. What he'd seen last night was likely the original Shen Jiu's childhood memories. This could be considered cheating, because for the current Shen Qingqiu, those memories had no hold on him, so he could easily and effortlessly break free. But thinking in retrospect, Shen Qingqiu thought it quite suspicious. The Shen Jiu within his dreams had been tied up, so originally he thought this was when Shen Jiu was still with the human traffickers, but within the room had been laid a soft carpet, with many cabinets for valuables, and the walls hung with calligraphy, giving it a noble air. It didn't look like a criminal's den, but rather was clearly a rich man's study. Looked like Shen Jiu at the Qiu's had not been as doted on as Qiu Haitong had claimed. Another explanation. One of the claims that was thrown against him as at his criminal trial was a woman named Qiu Haitong showed up and said, "You murdered my whole family! You used to be a slave at our house and we treated you well, but then you murdered everyone but me! How dare you?" That happened a while ago, so you may have forgotten. Well, this memory of his from the dream showed basically Shen Jiu tied up and beaten up at their mansion. And so suddenly Shen Qingqiu is like, wait, maybe you didn't treat him as well as you say you did. But he doesn't know because that portion of the story wasn't covered in the book, and he doesn't actually have Shen Jiu's memories. So that's part of the mystery now is, what really happened to the previous character? And why did he turn out to be so evil? Maybe it wasn't all his fault. And it's so sad that, like, poor Shen Jiu. Ugh, there's a lot going on with him. That was a long and fun, intense chapter. Alright. Chapter 42. Altercation in the Tavern. Shen Qingqiu jumped down from the bare wooden couch and subconsciously felt around his body. At least all his clothes were still there. But even though his clothes were intact, he didn't really want to wear them anymore. Though they were on his body, he had an ominous feeling they could be ripped off at any moment. Shen Qingqiu decided to borrow someone else's clothes to wear, but as soon as he'd finished borrowing them, flipping over the wall and landing on solid ground, he turned and saw a few people staring at him while doing nothing else. You truly couldn't avoid your enemies. They were actually a couple of disciples from a miscellaneous sect he'd seen while wandering the road during the festival last night. He'd yet to say a word when the leader immediately flashed his blade and yelled fiercely, "Shen Qingqiu, so you are in this city! Today, us disciples of Ba Qi sect will enact justice on behalf of the heavens." Truly, such an authentic standard actor's line. But why say you're enacting justice on behalf of the heavens or whatever? Didn't you say yesterday it was for Huanhua Palace's reward? What's the point of saying one thing to my face but another behind my back? Also, what is Ba Qi sect? I've never heard of it before. Shen Qingqiu didn't want to waste time on them. He slapped out a couple of freshly baked talismans in succession, one in each person's forehead, and their limbs went stiff without even the chance to block. He was in a bad mood. After he finished slapping on the talismans, he leisurely made a ripping motion with his hands. The next minute, those couple of disciples found their bodies moving against their will. "Why are you tearing my clothes? Aren't you tearing mine too? Shishong, I'm sorry, I can't control my hands!" Shen Qingqiu patted the plain white robes he'd just changed into and walked away without a backwards glance. Petty dork. Before he'd gone too far through the city, Shen Qingqiu discovered there were more than a few people who'd poured into Huayue City upon receiving the warrant for his capture. Though many of the cultivators were putting on an act by not wearing sect colors, disguised as common people, when they sat down at the roadside stands, their posture alone was entirely different from common folks. Shen Qingqiu felt he couldn't go on like this, so he found a corner, smeared his face with dirt, haphazardly stuck on some whiskers. After making all his preparations, he slowly returned to the street. Looking up at the sky, the clouds were thin, like they were slowly retreating. Just as expected, noon today would be the optimal time. When he looked down, a slender snow-white silhouette flashed through the crowd in front of him, fast and light, the profile outstandingly handsome. Liao Qingge! His hired thug was here! Shen Qingqiu's eyes brightened, but just as he was about to chase after him, a delicate shout came from a nearby tavern. "What are you saying, such a filthy mouth?" The voice was clear, delicate, and extremely familiar. Shen Qingqiu subconsciously paused his steps, the scene drawing his gaze over. Right afterwards, a sequence of crashes sounded, and all the passerby cast their glances to the side. At this time, another young woman humphed and said, "What, you have the guts to do things, but won't let others talk? No wonder Sangchong Mountain produced such a degenerate like Shen Qingqiu. Everyone in the sect, especially Qingjing Peak, must be eager to bury their shame. Huh! Unfortunately, everyone knows what kind of thing he is. You think you can hide it?" A spiteful tone. The young woman who'd spoken first immediately refuted. "Shizun is definitely not the kind of person who'd do something like this. Don't you dare slander him." A young girl who was still, even now, speaking up for him like so. Who else could it have been besides Ning Ying Ying? Ming Fan's voice came over as well. "We were polite to you out of respect for the old palace master. You ought to be more polite as well." Though Shen Qingqiu had wanted to go looking for Liao Qingge, having urgent matters, upon seeing this strange atmosphere, he hesitated for a second. In the end, afraid the Qingjing Peak disciples would be at a disadvantage, he stayed for now, flashing to the side to hide and watch. There were two clear camps in the tavern. One side was headed by Mingfan and Ning Yingying, while a crowd of Qingjing Peak disciples stood beside them, each with dark expressions on their faces. The other side had the little palace mistress in front, hands on her hips, facing them with a cold scowl. The Huanhua Palace disciples behind her had already flashed their blades, their gazes even more full of fury. Two young women, one lovely and delicate, the other with a gorgeous face, were gracefully facing off. Even if the air was filled with crackling, sizzling sparks, the scene was still incomparably easy on the eyes. Luo Benghe was setting fires in his backyard again. No, even Qingjing Peak's disciples had come, and they had run into Huanhua Palace. This truly was, you can't avoid your enemies. Shen Qingqiu could guarantee that if he left it and walked away, Qingjing Peak would definitely suffer more and greatly. Remembering the little palace master was domineering to the point that other than Luo Binghe, there was no one in the world she wouldn't dare hit. Injury or crippling was a common menu item. The little palace mistress humphed. Not that kind of person. Then tell me, why would he flee in fear of punishment? And he did that sort of thing! As she spoke, she clenched her teeth in hatred, the rims of her eyes going red. Ning Yingying shot back. Shizun was never convicted. What flee in fear of punishment? Also, there's no final conclusion on who did those things. Our Sangchong Mountain never blamed your Huanhua Palace for being gullible and overly suspicious, for insisting on imprisoning our Qingjing Peak's lord in your water prison without regard for the truth. If not for this, things wouldn't have blown up into what they were today. The reason for the tearing clothes wasn't the male lead, but him? Okay, so everybody thinks that something bad went on down then because they found all the ripped clothes, and they're assuming Shen Qingqiu did something bad to someone innocent. No, nothing happened. Literally, he just got whipped and his shirt got tore up. All this because of a shirt. Shen Qingqiu wiped his sweat, thinking, what merit does this humble Shen have to deserve this? At the same time, the dark cloud in his heart he'd never been able to wipe away grew even denser. Looking at the situation after he left, something must have happened at Huanhua Palace, and these new grudges and old debts had all fallen onto his head. The little palace mistress flew into a rage. To tell the truth, Shen Qingqiu felt that she was always in a state of rage. So you're saying our Huanhua Palace only has ourselves to blame? All right, Sengchong Mountain is truly impressive. So high up and domineering, so arrogant and unbridled, that not only do you refuse to apologize, you even act out before the victims. With this kind of behavior, you still have the face to flaunt yourselves as the #1 major sect? Preposterous! Ning Yingying curled her lip and said, Sengchong Mountain has already been acknowledged by the masses as the #1 major sect. Whether or not you accept it doesn't matter. And who came to us first and acted out? Our Qingjing Peak was eating a perfectly peaceful meal in this tavern. What's your justification for coming up and cursing us out? First saying that you want our whole Qingjing Peak to kneel to you, kowtow, and apologize for our offenses? Then saying our entire Sengchong Mountain should be buried together? Exactly who was being preposterous? Huayue City is not your Huanhua Palace's rear garden. Or are you saying the entire world is your house? Her voice was delicate and crisp. Hearing it, Shen Qingqiu was flabbergasted. Why was the innocent, naive, and silly Yingying so good at tearing others down? Why was this little palace mistress like something not properly tied up in a cage, biting at everyone she saw? Ning Yingying continued. Our Qingjing Peak has always obeyed etiquette. Shizun was a proper teacher and said not to bicker with dirty-mouthed little children. So this is the only reason we've tolerated you until now. Are you done? If you're done, then leave. Don't get in the way of our meal. I can't eat while looking at your face. As she spoke, she picked up a cup of tea from the table and splashed it at the other's feet. Oh, our little girl's all grown up. Little palace mistress didn't dodge quickly enough, and a few drops of tea splashed the hem of her dress. She screeched, You shrew! Mingfan couldn't take it anymore. Throwing aside his chopsticks, he sneered. Don't think we're afraid of you just because you're the old palace master's daughter. In any case, you're just a little girl relying on her dad. Neither your seniority or your cultivation are worth anything, though your ability to be annoyance is first-rate. Shrew? The way I see it, you're a bigger shrew than anyone else here. Huanhua Palace's entire face has been lost by you. Shen Qingqiu was shocked. Qingjing Peak's disciples were always so meek in front of him. They wouldn't even dare fart. If he told them to feed the chickens, they'd dare not walk the dogs. If he told them to make rice, they'd dare not make porridge. Turns out they were quite the smack-talkers outside. The little palace mistress's face went white in anger. She'd heard Qin Wanyu say this girl was a soft and bewitching little child, and Luo Binghe had been sect siblings for many years, childhood friends and innocent playmates. At once, envy and hatred flowed forth, and she suddenly raised her hand, a black shadow shooting out from her sleeve like a poisonous snake. Fuck, she has a new whip! Seeing it was finally coming to blows, the customers sitting in the tavern left quickly. When they passed by Shen Qingqiu, they actually all had unperturbed expressions like this was nothing strange. It looked like the residents of Huayue City were long used to this sort of scene. The waiter even adeptly struck a bill on the post before he walked out. The little palace mistress was the old palace master's beloved daughter. Her martial skills were from his hands-on teaching, and her weapons weren't ordinary in quality, the whip's strikes swift and fierce. While as the beloved young Shimei, pampered by the entirety of Qingjing Peak, Ning Yingying very rarely encountered danger and had virtually no real battle experience. Her sword waved back and forth, subtly having some trouble warding off the attacks. Mingfan wanted to help, but he couldn't get inside the circle of the iron whip's dance, and could only fret helplessly. Seeing the situation, Shen Qingqiu casually plucked a green leaf from the flower pot by his foot, then sent it flying. Ah, him and his leaves. The soft green leaf was filled with spiritual energy, and when it collided with the iron whip, there was a piercing crash of something hard on metal. The little palace mistress wasn't able to clearly see what had gone wrong, only felt the space between her finger and thumb go numb before her whip slipped from her hand and flew away. Ning Ying Ying had also startled. She'd been about to meet the attack with her sword, but seeing the little palace mistress had no weapon to block, she hurriedly pulled back, afraid of really stabbing her. But the little palace mistress had no mercy, and her reaction was extremely fast. After her weapon left her hand, she reversed the momentum of her arm, turning it into a slap. A smacking sound, and Ning Ying Ying held her face, her head turned to the side. Fuck! Seeing the 5 fingerprints on Ning Ying Ying's face, her cheeks swollen on one side, one could tell how ruthless the other's attack had been. Shen Qingqiu's heart ached terribly in distress. A disciple even I've never hit! You dare?! On seeing that pretty face of Ning Ying Ying's made lopsided, with one side swollen, one side smooth, extremely unsightly, the little palace mistress had vented her resentment and was extremely satisfied. She rubbed her wrist, raised her chin, and laughed. If your Shizun won't teach you, then let this palace mistress teach you. Number 1, people must be aware of propriety when speaking. Who the fuck are you trying to teach my disciples in my place? Ming Fan drew his sword and yelled, You bitch! You've gone too far! Let's go all out against them! The Qingjing Peak disciples couldn't take it any longer. Their youngest Shime had been hit. Could they take it? They all yelled and drew their swords, their blades gleaming with dazzling light. Shen Qingqiu was rapidly considering how to teach the little palace mistress a lesson without inciting greater bloodshed or exposing his location, when he suddenly noticed that in the crowd of Huanhua Palace disciples, one person was behaving strangely, very suspiciously. Shen Qingqiu observed the person for a few seconds, then his heart thumped. He silently thought, not good. It might not be so easy to slip away now. At first glance, the disciple looked very ordinary, mixed in with the crowd of Huanhua Palace disciples, hunched over and huddling, gaze flicked around. Shen Qingqiu noticed him because his face was one color, his neck another, and his hands yet 2 more different colors. And within this agitated mob, where everyone's blood was running hot, he did not draw his sword and yell for battle, nor did he glare at the other party with furious eyes, only brushing back and forth through the Huanhua Palace disciples with his head down, looking like a pickpocket taking advantage of the situation to steal. As far as Shen Qingqiu knew, only one person would act like this. While Ming Fan was mid-clash, sword ringing and clanging, he looked back and cried, Xiao Shime! Shime, how are you? Ning Ying Ying had frozen for a while, like she'd been slapped silly, and now she finally came back to her senses. Her face was half red, half white, expression furious and eyes teary. She brandished her sword to fight back. She'd only suffered this humiliation because she'd been momentarily soft-hearted. This time, she'd show no mercy. The shop became a chaotic battlefield. To the side, Shen Qingqiu saw an old cat lazily curl its tail, licking its fur in the sunlight. He picked it up with a single hand and tossed it into the tavern. No, kitty! I do not remember this. Hello, Phil. Okay, let me try that again. Shen Qingqiu saw an old cat lazily curl its tail, licking its fur in the sunlight. He picked it up with a single hand and tossed it into the tavern. Surprised, the old cat screeched and darted back and forth between the 2 camps of people. Shen Qingqiu lowered his head and followed it, slipping into the circle of battle. Why? Another person had mysteriously pushed inside, and both sides paused. Afraid to harm an innocent, Ning Ying Ying hesitated slightly. I guess he said, okay, he's made it look like he's not involved, he's just chasing his cat that is being, okay. I see why he did this now. Afraid to harm an innocent, Ning Ying Ying hesitated slightly. But the little palace mistress didn't have so many reservations. Picking her whip back up, she kept fighting as before. Shen Qingqiu chased the old cat back and forth through the hall, calling the name he'd given it on the spot. In the chaos of battle, despite Ning Ying Ying clearly having her hands bound, afraid to make a careless move, she kept feeling as if first someone was lifting her elbow, then like someone was pushing her shoulder. It was as if even without moving her sword, it still danced, throwing off silvery light. Suddenly, with 2 smacks, the little palace mistress held her face, dumbstruck and petrified, frozen on the spot. The 2 sounds were much louder and sharper than when she'd slapped Ning Ying Ying in the face. Everyone in both camps saw how Ning Ying Ying's arms had waved, slapping first with one hand and the other, giving the little palace master 2 smacks in the face, and they all stopped fighting in tacit agreement. Okay, so what he did was he threw the cat to make it look like he's just an old man looking for his cat, and the cat's fine, running around in the room. And so everybody's like, okay, this is a weird cat guy. And as he's moving through the room, he helps Ning Ying Ying fight secretly, like push her elbow. That's so funny. Poor kitty. Just trying to have a chill day, and then you get thrown into a friggin' martial arts fight. Poor cat. Let's see how long the next chapter is, since we got some folks here. I think I can do one more. Oh, this might be a good one to stop on, too. Yeah, alright, this might be the last one we read. Oof. Prepare yourselves. Chapter 43. Main character dies. The end. Ming Fan cheered. Xiao Shimei! Nice hit! Ning Ying Ying weakly said, No, actually, that wasn't me. Ming Fan said in encouragement, Don't be scared, it's already done. Anyone can tell she started it. We didn't hurt her out of kindness, and she launched a sneak attack instead. Serves her right. The crowd of Qingjing Peak disciples all agreed in succession. The little palace mistress's tears glistened. You dared hit me! Even my dad's never hit me! Ning Ying Ying said, No, it really wasn't me. Ming Fan cut in, scoffing. It was you! Remember, whenever Qingjing Peak's disciples are bullied, we must return it twofold. Not hitting would mean we've let down Shizun's teachings. Shen Qingqiu internally began cheering together with his disciples. Ming Fan, this child had truly taken his teachings to heart. Yes. Grudges must be repaid, just like this. Stealthily, Shen Qingqiu slipped into the group of Huanhua Palace disciples and finally caught the old cat, who was still howling and screeching. No matter how stupid a person was, they should still see something was off. While cupping 2 red, very cumbersome-looking swollen cheeks, the little palace mistress glared at him, filled with resentment. Hey! Who are you exactly? You dare mess around with me like this? The Huanhua Palace disciples surrounded him and yelled, The palace mistress is asking you a question! Shen Qingqiu bent over and released the cat, then straightened, pointing to the disciple, hunched and lurking in the back. Why don't you ask who exactly is he? Everyone's gaze immediately focused on that person. The little palace mistress was still in a rage. Originally, she only gave a sideways glance, but who knew that the more she looked, the more off it seemed? Temporarily unable to worry about Shen Qingqiu, she turned away and said suspiciously, Who are you? What are you doing dressed like this? Are you really from our Huanhua Palace? Why have I never seen you before? The disciple mumbled but couldn't manage a reply. She turned to her subordinates. What about you? Do you recognize him? Seeing the situation didn't look good, the disciple made a strange sound, and everyone turned their blades on him. Shen Qingqiu raised his voice and yelled, Don't get close! At the same time, he plucked another leaf, then flicked his wrist and sent it forth. This time, not only Ning Ying Ying, but Ming Fan also saw the way the leaf flew and froze. Possessing a sword glare's glow, the leaf pierced the air, sliced open the disciples' outer robes, and cleaved through the clothes, revealing the skin underneath. With this, everyone had expressions like they'd seen a ghost. They repeatedly backed up, some even gave a shriek and directly leapt from the tavern. Scarlet-covered skin. It matched exactly with Shen Qingqiu's guess just now. To his knowledge, only one type of person bore themselves this way, a sower disguised as a human person. Remember, sowers are those demons from a few chapters ago that, with one touch, can turn you into demon meat. You die. It's bad. Because only the exposed part of its skin had been painted a normal person's skin color, with the rest neglected, the sower's cover was blown on the spot. It decided it had nothing to lose, and rushed forward with a yell, eyes bloodshot. These disciples were young juniors. Most hadn't gone to Jinlan City last time, and had never seen, only heard of this monster. So when one truly appeared before them now, it was even madly grabbing at whoever saw it. They were scared senseless. Shen Qingqiu saw that the sower had almost thrown itself onto a Qingjing Peak disciple. He flashed in front and planted a foot into its chest, sending it flying through 2 tables, wildly spewing fresh blood. He turned his head and yelled, "Hurry, leave!" Ning Ying Ying latched onto him instead, crying and laughing. "Shizun! Is it Shizun?" "No way! My face is covered in dirt and whiskers and you still recognize me?" Though he was the slightest bit moved. At this kind of time, not leaving and actually staying to be a burden instead, even calling out his true identity through his disguise, as expected, still dumb. Seeing the sower tenaciously and unyieldingly throw itself over again, Shen Qingqiu tossed Ning Ying Ying away with a hand as gentle as spring. Then, with the other hand harsh as winter, he flicked a fire technique at the enemy. It didn't hit. No. It didn't come out! The fountain of blood for Sukomi that had stayed dormant and hidden in Shen Qingqiu's throat for many years began to stir again. He'd had enough of this without a cure, the poison that loved to drop the ball during key moments. He snapped his fingers continuously many times, but not a single flame sprang forth. Like a lighter out of lighter fluid, click, click. No sparks, no matter how he snapped. While Shen Qingqiu was flustered, the sower had already thrown itself over and latched onto his thigh. He involuntarily raised the right hand that was plagued with misfortunes. As expected, 3 red patches could be seen taking root and growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not fair. Why was he infected so quickly each time? Perhaps his rage and sorrow became a fuse, because with his last snap, an explosive burst of flames finally ignited between his fingers. Shen Qingqiu sent the sower clinging to his thigh flying with a kick, and struck downwards with a palm full of raging flames. The sower was engulfed in a blaze and horrible shrieks. Ning Ying Ying and Ming Fan tearfully sandwiched him from his left and right. "Shizun!" The other Qingjing Peak disciples were also about to join in, but quickly retreated under their Shizun's go out and run 500 laps glare. Since his disguise was already busted, Shen Qingqiu scrubbed and wiped at his face until he returned to his original appearance. Was anyone infected? Then, with a heartfelt tone, he finally said the line he'd always really wanted to say to others. "Hurry and take some medicine. You must not stop taking medicine." One male and one female voice, one high and one low, sobbed into his ears. "Shizun, we finally found you! Shizun, this disciple missed you so much! It hurt!" Shen Qingqiu hadn't replied when his back suddenly felt cold. He pushed aside his 2 disciples and sent Shouya out from his clothes. With a clang, the sword blocked the little palace mistress's refined iron whip. If just now, during the altercation with Qingjing Peak, the little palace mistress could have been considered temporarily enraged, this time her actions harbored killing intent. She hacked with the sword whip in her hand like it was a knife or an axe, each move more vicious and desperate. Shen Qingqiu said bluntly, "Are you mad? Where does this rage come from every day?" He'd long wanted to ask this question. The little palace mistress shouted, "You wicked villain! Return my Shishong and Shiji's lives!" Shen Qingqiu first thought that she was again crying about the Huahuan Palace disciples who died during the Immortal Alliance conference, but who'd know that the little palace mistress would scream the next line, "Just because Ma Shishong said some harsh things to you while you were being imprisoned, he died so horribly, so horribly." Who's Ma Shishong? Could it be that scathing, nasty, pockmark-faced guy? Shen Qingqiu said, "When leaving Huanhua Palace, this Shen didn't take a single life. What point is there in saying to me he died horribly?" He then turned and whispered, "He really died? How horrible was it?" Ming Fan also quietly answered, "He really did die. It was very, very horrible. His entire body was green and decayed. They said it was a highly toxic demonic poison." Toxic demonic poison. It sounded like Luo Binghei's work. The little palace mistress said, "Quibbling is useless. Today, for the deaths of my Huanhua Palace disciples, I absolutely must make you pay with your life." Shen Qingqiu said, "This Shen has never been good with poison. There are hundreds upon thousands of ways to kill your Huanhua Palace disciples. Why would I choose the most cumbersome way? I did indeed escape from prison, but who can prove I killed them?" A Huanhua Palace disciple shouted, "Then who can prove you didn't kill them?" If he didn't untangle this, he was afraid that in the future the two sects would never be able to let matters rest. Shen Qingqiu deliberated a little, then probed. Regarding this incident, what did your esteemed sect head's disciple, Gong Yixiao, say? Little palace mistress's eyes went wide. The tears that had originally stopped started to fall once more. You still dare mention Gong Yixiao? She raised her whip and pointed at Shen Qingqiu. You think that just because he's dead and can't testify, you can use him however you wish? Shen Qingqiu felt like he'd been struck by lightning. He caught her whip mid-strike between two fingers. He thought he'd heard wrong. What did you say? Gong Yixiao died? When did this happen? Who did it? Even in the original work, the worst that Gong Yixiao received was being assigned to Huanhua Palace's borderlands, becoming a trivial character. The little palace mistress viciously said, Who did it? You still have the face to ask who did it! Huanhua Palace's disciples all surrounded him, clothes rustling. She ordered, Kill this despicable villain! Take revenge for Gong Yixiong, for the Xishongs and Shijis guarding this water prison, and satisfy their grudges! Shen Qingqiu's heart went cold. Could it be that all the disciples guarding the water prison, including Gong Yixiao, had been slaughtered by Luo Binghe? And these hundreds of lives had all been placed on his head? Ning Yingying angrily said, Stupid brat, you don't get it no matter what we say. Don't you see my Shizun also doesn't know? Qingjing Peak's disciples immediately entered the fray as well. Swords had no eyes. Lest Shen Qingqiu wanted to be stabbed, he had no time to think carefully. Seeing the fight would have no end if they continued, he leapt out of the tavern, lightly tossing down the words, Come out! As expected, both camps didn't bother continuing and followed after him, each trying to squeeze out first. As soon as he landed on the main street, Shen Qingqiu was dumbfounded. A long row of cultivators dressed in various colors were waiting there, ready for battle, glaring like tigers watching prey. All right. After all, they'd made such a big commotion in the tavern, not drawing people over would have been quite unscientific, right? With a light push of his foot, Shen Qingqiu's steps skimmed the roof tiles, and he landed with a flip. He took a deep breath, then yelled from the pit of his stomach, Liu Qingge! Someone flew up on their sword and angrily denounced, Shen Qingqiu, your heart is truly wicked. You purposefully flew to this place, drawing people from various sects here. Was it so you could collude with demons and in one fell swoop reenact the Immortal Alliance Conference's tragedy? Our Bai Chi sect definitely won't let you succeed. So any and all accusations are perfectly acceptable, huh? Shen Qingqiu wasn't even in the mood to rant. From the east came the hiss of a sword glare, and a person in white arrived on a sword, fast as lightning. His arrival was too forceful, pointlessly whipping up a powerful wind, and it threw the person right off their own sword. Luo Qingge stood securely on Cheng Luan, with his arms crossed, and said, What is it? Too reliable, Great Master Liu. Shen Qingqiu said with sincerity, Take me away. Luo Qingge. ... Shen Qingqiu said, My poison flared up again. I can't summon the chi to fly on my sword. If you don't take me, I'll just plummet from the sky. Liu Qingge gave a sigh, then said, Get on. The crowd gathered to watch beneath them, castigated them without rest, with things like Sangchong Mountain abets and shelters evil, Baijian Peak and Qingjing Peak wallow together in filth. But both of them pretended not to hear them. Cheng Luan soared into the sky, the wind whistling in their ears, leaving the 10+ people chasing them on swords far behind. Liu Qingge said, Where to? Shen Qingqiu said, The roof of the tallest building in the city. Help me hold these people off. Liu Qingge said, What exactly is up with you? If you didn't wish to enter prison, why not say earlier? You've made things so troublesome. Even if Sangchong Mountain can't navigate the water prison, can't we destroy it? Shen Qingqiu said, This, destroying the water prison wasn't necessary. Liu Qingge said, Get off. Shen Qingqiu replied, I'm only saying it wasn't necessary. I'm still grateful for your kindness. No need to force me off. God, I love this. Liu Qingge is such a bro. Like, he's a criminal on the run from the law, and all he does is get on a roof and shout for his friend, and he shows up like, Yo, what do you need? I'm with you, ride or die, let's do this. I love their relationship, and it is not surprising that secondary to Luo Benghe and Shen Qingqiu, Pairing Liu Qingge with the two of them, or at least with Qingqiu, is very popular, because it's obvious Liu Qingge cares for him a lot. He goes through so much shit for this guy. Aw, thank you, Sarah. I'm glad you're enjoying the story. I'm having quite a lot of fun reading it. Liu Qingge said, "Something's coming." Shen Qingqiu didn't say another word and jumped off at once. The tip of his foot touched tile. He was stooped over on the roof of a building. Cheng Luen's momentum was incredibly powerful. Liu Qingge and his sword did a dazzling somersault in midair. Only then did he manage to break, eyes fixed attentively elsewhere. Shen Qingqiu also followed his gaze over, but he heard a sneer from behind him. "Where are you looking?" Shen Qingqiu nearly stumbled on the spot. That "you just wait and see" actually wasn't talk. Then again, since when had Luo Binghe been talk? He actually came to capture him, even braving the risk of Shin Mo's backlash. How deep was this resentment? Luo Binghe glared unwaveringly at them, expression dark, then slowly extended a hand to Shen Qingqiu and said, "Come with me." Shen Qingqiu said, "Gong Yizhao's dead." Luo Binghe went rigid. Shen Qingqiu continued, "The disciples guarding the water prison are also dead." Luo Binghe, 100+ Huanhua Palace lives, all so I'd be hated and persecuted? Was it truly worth it? Red flashed through Luo Binghe's pupils. He coldly said, "In any case, you won't believe me no matter what I say. Then there's no need to blather. I'll ask again. Will you come or not?" He stubbornly refused to withdraw that hand. Shen Qingqiu had yet to answer when suddenly 10+ people landed around them, hemming them in on the roof with their swords. The leader was again the man from Ba Chi sect. This time he'd lowered his center of gravity, basically crouching in horse stance upon his sword to prevent himself from being thrown off again. He noisily shouted, "Shen Qingqiu is ours! No one else should dare think of—" Luo Binghe abruptly turned his head and yelled, "Beat it!" He hadn't even drawn his sword, but from his body burst forth a strong blast of spiritual energy, and a shrill, whistling shriek filled the ears of everyone on the scene. This time, every one of the 10+ people were overturned, and tossed with their swords tens of feet away. Half of them slammed into walls or pillars, coughing up fresh blood. The Ba Chi sect had met someone with a truly badass, overbearing aura, and been wiped out completely. The remaining spectators were all terrified. This black-clothed young man's cultivation was spectacular. How come so few had heard his name in the past? Liu Qingge pushed Shen Qingqiu. "Go, do what you need to do." Shen Qingqiu said, "Can you handle it by yourself?" 5-2. Oh, 5-2. He hadn't forgotten those numbers. He'd only called Liu Qingge over to help him fight Small Fry and give him a lift along the way. Not so Liu Qingge would meet a sudden unfortunate end. 5-2 is the odds as whether Liu Qingge will beat Luo Binghe. Wait, Liu Qingge, Luo Binghe. They're slightly similar sounding, but I keep mixing up the pronunciation. It's more of a W sound in the Luo. These two characters definitely weren't those who'd listen to others. At the first wrong word, without even a word, they started to fight. Cheng Luen was incredibly powerful, but Luo Binghe didn't draw his sword. Concentrating spiritual energy in his hand and using his open palm like a blade, he met it straight on. Shen Qingqiu knew why he didn't draw his sword. In a duel between masters, one couldn't afford a single error, and this kind of time was when it was the easiest for Shin Mo to take advantage of an opening and invade. If he was possessed with demonic chi while everyone was watching, greatly increasing his murderousness, it wouldn't be worth it. Luo Binghe's body had two sets of cultivation systems, one with spiritual chi, one with demonic chi. Because his dual heritage had combined successfully, these two systems didn't interfere with each other, each operating excellently. When necessary, his left and right hands could even use two different types of attack together for a show of force. but currently he couldn't draw his sword. It wasn't convenient for him to use demonic chi, so his killing power could only be diminished. He and Liu Qingge actually became evenly matched. Deafening noises shook the sky above the roof, white arcs and spiritual energy bursting together. Their duel was too fierce. None of the cultivators below dared rush in recklessly. Even the most inexperienced and undiscerning rookie would be able to see that if even one brushed the two's roiling, murderous chi, they'd ascend right to heaven without the need to cultivate. The fight was so fierce, Shen Qingqiu actually felt an urge. If it hadn't been for Without a Cure flaring up at such an inopportune time, he would have wanted to enter the battle. But it was time. He squinted at the sky, then leapt to the highest level of the building. On the highest roof, a gale screamed. It felt like it could blow him right off. Luo Binghe saw this from afar and was suddenly seized by impatience. No longer in the mood to fight, the malevolence in his eyes steeply surged, and he reached for the hilt of the long sword on his back. He actually dared draw his sword here? Shen Qingqiu rushed to say, "Luo Binghe, don't be rash!" Luo Binghe said harshly, "Too late!" With a flip of his wrist, Shin Mo came out, carrying a dark, billowing chi that could be seen with the naked eye. Cheng Luen stabbed straight towards him. Luo Binghe gently flicked Shin Mo's blade edge, which was as thin as a cicada's wing. From the center oozed something like a chill, wave after wave, and Cheng Luen actually came to a complete stop in midair. Liu Qingge had never experienced his sword disobeying his orders. He couldn't conceal his shock, but Shen Qingqiu knew that the situation was severe. If Luo Binghe really was hit with Shin Mo's backlash here, the lives of everyone at the scene, in the entire Huahua city, and within a 50-kilometer radius, would be all over. As a last resort, Shen Qingqiu unsheathed Shu Ya and said, "Luo Binghe, come here. Today we must come to a resolution." Luo Binghe raised his head and gave him a dark look. Next moment, he'd flashed to around a meter before him, then raising his hand drew a barrier. It covered the entire roof, isolating them from everyone else. He smiled, expression twisted. "Resolution? Resolution how? Shizun, at this point, do you really think what's between us can be resolved cleanly?" "Why can't it be?" Shen Qingqiu breathed in lightly. Though he was clutching his sword, he had no intention to fight. In truth, him wielding the sword now wouldn't do anything. He said, "As things are now, there's nothing I can say. Sure enough, even if we scheme to exhaustion, we cannot avoid fate." Luo Binghe chuckled. "Fate? What is fate? That which let a 4-year-old child be humiliated, yet no one would lend a hand to help? That let an innocent old woman die of heartbreak and starvation?" With each line came a step forward, menacing. "Or let me fight with dogs for scraps? Or let the person I wholeheartedly adored lie to me, abandon me, betray me, then push me down into a place worse than purgatory with his own 2 hands?" He said, "Shizun, look at the way I am now. Am I strong enough? But do you know how I spent those 3 years underground? For 3 years within the endless abyss. At all times and moments, my mind thought only of Shizun. I thought about why Shizun would do this to me. Why you refused to even give me a single chance to explain or plead. You want me to concede that this was the fate the heavens ordained for me? I thought for such a long time, and I finally understood." Within Luo Binghe's smile was a terrifying viciousness. "None of that is important. Just doing what I want is enough. Fate either never existed or it's something I should trample beneath my feet." With the scorching sun overhead, the last wisps of cloud had also disappeared without a trace. Sunlight flooded the entire city, its brilliance dazzling, like the entire land had been strewn with pure gold. Shen Qingqiu turned his gaze away from the sky. Because he'd been staring straight at the sun, unexpectedly, there were some tears glistening in his vision. Even though he'd had no other choice, he truly was greatly responsible for Luo Binghe's reaching the point today, becoming a dark young man who thought only of revenge on society. Originally, he'd wanted to stop Luo Binghe from becoming so extreme, But everything he'd done, not only had it failed to have a positive effect, it actually etched Luo Binghei's hatred and resentment even deeper into his bones. Luo Binghei saw his expression suddenly soften and couldn't help but startle. But at the same time, an enormous pain assailed his heart. He clenched his teeth, hand clutching tightly at Shin Mo that was trying to break free. No, he couldn't get backlash here, not at this moment. Suddenly, Shen Qingqiu gently said, "Don't let it overpower your mind." Upon hearing his voice, in this trance, it was like he'd been transported to those years on Qingjing Peak. It became increasingly harder for Luo Binghei to control himself. There seemed to be a sharp knife churning within his brain, and Shin Mo's black flames suddenly surged. The assault this time was ferocious. Luo Binghei was in unbearable pain when he suddenly felt someone gently embrace his shoulders. There was a blast of spiritual qi akin to the collapse of a 1,000-kilometer dike, like a rainstorm after a long drought. It poured into Luo Binghei's body like a flood, extinguishing Shin Mo's malevolence that had been deadlocked within him. Luo Binghei's breathing evened out, returning to normal, but his heart went cold. Self-destruction. Below the roof, some in the crowd were already yelling in shock. "Shen Qingqiu self-destructed!" Shen Qingqiu let go of Luo Binghei and slowly backed away, staggering once. Shu Ya fell first. Its master's spiritual energy was gone, and a sword exists with its master. The blade shattered into multiple sections in midair. Shen Qingqiu always had the bad habit of swallowing down his blood. At this moment, he couldn't swallow it down anymore. After his spiritual body had completely destructed, he was now below even a common person, a mere ruined shell. His voice was light and fluttering, the wind blowing most of it away. Yet Luo Binghei could hear him as clearly as before. What he said was, "For everything in the past, today I'm repaying you." Count it as him doing a good thing at last. Then he toppled backwards and fell from the building. At first, Luo Binghei only blankly watched. Everything playing out in his eyes was now many times slower. Even the moment when Shen Qingqiu fell had slowed to being crystal clear. The body falling in midair was like a blood-stained paper kite. Only when Luo Binghei's body started to move by itself, scrambling to catch Shen Qingqiu before he hit the ground, did he finally discover that Shen Qingqiu's torso was light and insubstantial, his entire body without a wisp of spiritual energy, truly like a paper kite, ripping with the slightest force, to the point you didn't need force. It'd already fall apart. He was still in disbelief. Didn't Shizun hate his blood the most? Wasn't he always unwilling to be near him, to associate with him at all? So why, at the last moment, did he so gently help him contain his mind, as gentle as he'd been during those years? Why didn't he hesitate to help him suppress Shinmo's backlash, to the point of destroying his spiritual body? All around him, people seemed to be muttering things like, "Execute the demon," and "Eliminate your own for justice." Luo Binghei's mind was in a muddle. He only held Shen Qingqiu and mumbled, "Shizun?" The Qingjing Peak's disciples had fought the Huanhua Palace disciples the entire way and finally arrived. Ning Yingying had already heard that Luo Binghei was alive. At such a sudden reunion, she was both surprised and happy. But then she saw Shen Qingqiu, whose eyes were closed peacefully. The words she'd been about to say took a turn, and she said in a trembling voice, "Luo, Shizun, what happened to him?" Liu Qingge walked over, a smear of blood still on his lips. His expression was heavy as he said, "He's dead!" All the disciples were dumbstruck. Suddenly, Ming Fan yelled, "Who killed him?" Everyone's gaze all focused on Luo Binghei. Luo Binghei hadn't killed him, strictly speaking, but Shen Qingqiu had indeed self-destructed and died before him. The disciples behind Ming Fan drew their swords about to attack when Liu Qingge said, "You can't defeat him." Both of Ming Fan's eyes were bright red. "Liu Shishu! Then Liu Shishu can surely kill him and avenge Shizun, right?" Liu Qingge said lightly, "I can't defeat him either." Ming Fan choked. Liu Qingge wiped away the blood by his mouth and said, Shen Qingqiu wasn't killed by him. However, though he wasn't killed by him, he indeed died because of him. Each word of Liu Qingge's was like a knife drawn from a sheath. Sangchong Mountain must avenge this grudge! Luo Binghe turned a deaf ear to it all. His mind a huge mess and completely at a loss. He was still holding Shen Qingqiu's rapidly cooling body. It seemed like he wanted to call for him loudly, shake him awake, but didn't dare to, as if he was afraid of being scolded. He murmured, Shizun? Mingfan snapped. Stop calling him Shizun! Shizun can't bear such a burden! Fellow Shidis, let's fight together! So what if we can't defeat him? At most, we'll be killed by him! Ning Yingying spread her arms and stopped him. Mingfan was furious and agitated. He thought that Ning Yingying was still clinging to old feelings. Shime, things are already like this. How come you don't get it? Ning Yingying said, You shut up. Rushing to your death like this, would Shizun know? If he knew, what would he say? Shizun would rather get infected than see us all take advantage of or bullied, yet you'd throw away your life like this? All these years, Ning Yingying had always had the charming attitude of a young maiden. Seeing her suddenly so harsh, Mingfan froze. After a while, tears suddenly flowed down his face. Sobbing, he miserably wept. But like this, it's just too unjust for Shizun. Even though he clearly didn't do it, people kept saying he colluded with demons, that he was a killer, a degenerate, and shut him in the water prison. He didn't even get a chance to clear his name. He choked with sobs. Even though he clearly loved this brat so much. At the Immortal Alliance conference, he bet 5,000 spirit stones without hesitation. His hopes for him were that high. Whenever anyone praised him, he'd be so happy. Afterwards, he refused to return Gengyang to Wanjian Peak, insisting on keeping the broken sword so he could erect a grave in the back mountain. He was heartbroken for so long, and in the end, this is what he got? Luo Binghe listened in a trance, unsure if it was an illusion or reality. Is that so? At the time, Shizun had been heartbroken? Ning Yingying stepped towards him. Her eyes were red, but her words and breathing were steady. She said, Alua, though we weren't there for Jinlan City, we heard about it. I don't know why you didn't return to Sengchong Mountain despite being alive, and I don't know why you wouldn't stand up for Shizun, and I definitely don't know what happened at the Immortal Alliance conference back then. But Shizun's kindness when raising and nurturing you, his feelings when doting on and protecting you, they weren't fake. Everyone knows from personal experience. After a pause, she continued, If you feel that Shizun from long ago didn't treat you well, think about the day you lost your jade pendant. Our Shishong suddenly inexplicably backed off. You yourself should know there was something strange. Then there's no one else on Qingjing Peak who'd turn leaves into weapons to teach a small lesson. Luo Binghe involuntarily clutched Shen Qingqiu tighter. He whispered, I was wrong, Shizun. I really know I was wrong. I never thought of killing you. Ning Yingying said loudly, My words end here. If Shizun really did something to wrong you and you can't forgive him no matter what, then at least today he finally repaid it all, right? So from now on you... At this point she couldn't take it anymore and turned her head away. I ask that you stop calling him Shizun. Repaid? That's right. Just then Shizun had said something like, repaying you. Had he been saying, for pushing him into the endless abyss, he'd fall from a building for his sake today? Luo Binghe started to panic. I don't want you to repay me. I just couldn't get over my anger, he spoke to himself. I couldn't get over my anger that whenever you see me, it's like you're seeing a ghost. That you'd happily smile and laugh with others even though you were only like that with me in the past. And now you aren't even willing to say more than the bare minimum to me. You can even keep suspecting me. I was wrong. He stammered and stuttered, talking while wiping the blood on Shen Qingqiu's face. You dislike me being a demon, so I was afraid if I returned directly to Sengchong Mountain you'd throw me out. I thought, if I took over Huanhua Palace and became like you, a leader of righteous cultivators, it could make you happy. Luo Binghe said, voice trembling. Shizun, I really... That's the end of the chapter. gonna stop. That is the end of what I think of as kind of part 2 of the story. The first part is before the kicking him into the abyss when he's a kid. Second part is when he comes back the first time, and then poor Shizune dies. But of course the story's not over. It's a story about magic and monsters. It's not going to end there. So the second part will be when Shizune comes back, and what happens then, and where the Wobinghe's gone from here. Yeah, that's so sad that they both just misunderstood each other so much. And if they had just talked to each other. But that's the point of the story. Shen Qingqiu is still looking at everything as if it's a book and not his life. He's looking at it as if, oh, well, obviously he wants to kill me because that's how it is in the book because he's a character. No, he's not. He's a person, and he's changed. Of course there will be more problems and misunderstandings in the future, and we still don't know who actually caused all these problems, because people are getting murdered and stuff. And if it's not Binghe, and it's not Shizune, then who is it? We'll find out next week. Thanks for listening. That is not the end of the story, Phil. Tomorrow will be another reading. I may try 10 o'clock? I don't know. I hesitate to go later than 10, even though I know most people seem to be freer in the afternoons, but I like splitting it up and giving a break between. We'll see. We'll keep experimenting with times. Maybe I'll move the game streams later and have maybe like 10 o'clock, 4 o'clock. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Thanks for listening. Thanks to members like Jeff and Daniel and Phil, all you guys for supporting the channel. You're amazing. Thank you for the help and support. I'll be back for game stuff in a couple hours, and see y'all then. Bye.